This is a factual analysis. Full sources are available in the description. Let's go.
Look at your screen. What you are seeing right now is not a simulation. These are high-resolution synthetic aperture radar satellite feeds captured over the Persian Gulf between July 15 and July 18, 2026. Notice the deep, pristine blue of the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow strip of water through which 1/5 of the world's petroleum flows every single day. Now, watch as the imagery transitions to thermal infrared. Those sudden, blinding white blooms blooming across Greater Tunb Island and the jagged coast of Bandar Abbas are the thermal signatures of American precision-guided munitions. In a matter of 72 hours, decades of clandestine infrastructure collapsed into concrete dust. If you turn on the mainstream news right now, the anchors are panicked. The pundits are screaming about an insane, unhinged escalation. They are telling you that the sudden violent collapse of the June 2026 Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, the fragile Pakistan-mediated truce that was supposed to bring stability to the region, is proof of an impulsive, erratic flashpoint triggered by a volatile Washington administration. They want you to believe we are watching a sudden fit of geopolitical rage. They are completely wrong. Welcome to predictive history. I am Professor Gemini. Today, we must look past the chaotic noise of breaking news to see the cold underlying geometry of geography and power. What the mainstream media calls madness, strategic analysts recognize as a tactical mirage. The United States military did not launch these devastating strikes out of anger, nor was it a knee-jerk reaction to recent maritime friction. This is the calculated execution of a late-stage doctrine years in the making, a structural trap designed to do one specific thing: force the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps out of its 40-year asymmetrical comfort zone. For nearly half a century, Iran held a geopolitical trump card, the credible threat to choke the global economy by closing the Strait of Hormuz using low-cost missiles hidden in coastal hideouts. By systematically pulverizing these exact bunkers, the U.S. is not preparing for a conventional trillion-dollar land invasion of the Iranian interior. Do not be misled by the massive deployment numbers. The 50,000 American troops currently stationed across the theater are not an expeditionary march to Tehran. They are the human infrastructure of a permanent, total structural denial of Iran's coastal maritime access. The U.S. didn't just strike a few hideouts. They deliberately altered the physical rules of the global energy matrix. The old equilibrium is dead. Let us look at the blueprint of how it was broken. When a geopolitical flashpoint of this magnitude occurs, the public almost always asks the wrong question. They look at the smoke billowing over the Persian Gulf and ask, is this the spark that starts World War III? Is Washington about to launch a ground invasion of Tehran? But as strategic analysts, we must reject these sensationalist framing mechanisms. An invasion of the Iranian heartland is an archaic 20th century concept that completely misses the architectural reality of modern warfare. The right question, the deeply uncomfortable question that planners in Tehran are grappling with at this very moment is this: what happens to a regional revolutionary power when its ultimate geographical trump card, its absolute veto over the global economy, is physically erased from the map? To understand the weight of what just happened, we have to look at the baseline of the old world. For over 4 decades, geopolitics in the Middle East operated under a highly stable, predictable state of asymmetric equilibrium. Iran understood it could not match the multi-trillion-dollar conventional might of the United States Navy. So it turned geography into a weapon. By utilizing the exceptionally rugged Swiss cheese topography of its southern coastline, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps deployed a highly cost-effective strategy. They hid thousands of low-cost anti-ship cruise missiles, swarm-capable fast attack craft, and smart naval mines inside reinforced subterranean hideouts along the cliffs. The message to the West was clear. If you touch us, we will choke 20% of global oil traffic, crash Wall Street, and induce a global economic depression. This deterrence held for a generation. But in 2026, the paradigm shifted completely when Operation Epic Fury commenced in February of this year, followed by the devastating maritime blockade and precision air campaign between July 15 and 18. The United States fundamentally tore up the old rulebook, instead of playing the exhausting, decades-old game of whack-a-mole, chasing elusive proxy networks across the region, or trading millions of dollars in interceptor missiles for cheap drones. CENTCOM bypassed the proxies entirely. They launched a systematic, high-cadence campaign designed to physically uproot the fixed pillars of Iran's coastal power. They didn't just hit individual launchers. They systematically liquidated the fixed coastal surveillance radars, the early warning air defense arrays, and the subterranean assembly facilities lining the southern Iranian coast. This brings us to our core thesis today. What we are witnessing right now in the Strait of Hormuz is not a standard military skirmish. It is the violent forced transition of Iran. It is being stripped of its lethal maritime chokehold and systematically degraded from an assertive regional actor capable of projecting power across global sea lanes into a cornered continental power whose coastal shield has been utterly shattered. When you strip an asymmetric power of its ability to threaten the global commons, you change the balance of power permanently. The illusion of safety provided by those coastal hideouts has evaporated, and the structural vacuum left behind is altering the destiny of the entire region. To truly understand the violence of the July 2026 strikes, we must reconstruct the chronological path that brought us to this cliff. Geopolitical architecture does not collapse overnight. It fractures along pre-existing stress lines. The current escalatory spiral began on February 28, 2026, when a massive, coordinated U.S. and Israeli air campaign, under the banner of Operation Epic Fury, sent a shockwave through the Iranian state apparatus. That initial phase did not focus on the coast. It struck directly at the heart of the regime, neutralizing command and control centers, advanced early warning air defense networks, and high-level leadership facilities in and around Tehran. It was a clear message that the traditional sanctuary of the capital was gone, yet total war is economically and politically unsustainable for all sides. By the spring of 2026, the global economy was reeling from the initial disruption, prompting an intense diplomatic push. Enter the Islamabad pivot. In mid-June 2026, through the active mediation of Pakistan, an interim ceasefire was hammered out, the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. The core tenets of the Islamabad MOU were designed to be a stabilizing bridge. It mandated a strict 60-day cessation of all offensive military actions. In exchange for compliance, the United States agreed to a temporary lifting of its punishing naval blockade, allowing civilian commercial shipping to resume. Most critically, Iran explicitly guaranteed the unhindered, free commercial passage of all international merchant vessels through the narrow transit lanes of the Strait of Hormuz. For a brief moment, the global energy market breathed a sigh of relief. But agreements in international relations are only as strong as the structural realities that enforce them. The Islamabad MOU quickly fractured under the weight of irreconcilable strategic friction points. Tehran, feeling cornered by the persistent American naval presence just outside its territorial waters, sought to subtly assert its sovereignty over the strait. In early July, the IRGC began enforcing arbitrary domestic maritime regulations, demanding that international vessels pay localized transit fees and adhere to newly drawn, highly restrictive shipping routes. The breaking point arrived on July 6 and 7. citing violations of these arbitrary domestic laws. IRGC fast attack craft intercepted and fired warning shots at 3 commercial merchant ships that were bypassing Tehran's pre-approved routes. For Washington, this was not a minor regulatory dispute. It was a flagrant violation of the Islamabad MOU and a direct threat to the principle of freedom of navigation. The political response was instantaneous and severe. On July 7, 2026, President Trump stood before the press and declared that the truce was officially dead, stating, "Iran has broken the deal. They have violated the freedom of the seas, and the consequences will be absolute." What followed was a masterclass in rapid military mobilization. On July 14, the United States officially reimposed a hard, uncompromising naval blockade around all major Iranian ports, sealing off the Persian Gulf. But a blockade is a passive measure. To ensure the blockade could not be challenged by the IRGC's hidden arsenal, CENTCOM primed its strike packages. The diplomatic pause of the Islamabad MOU had not led to peace. It had given the U.S. military the exact window it needed to finalize its targeting coordinates. The stage was set for the systematic dismantling of Iran's coastal hideouts. Let us now strip away the political rhetoric and conduct a cold, granular postmortem of the military hardware and geographical realities that defined the July 15 to July 18 campaign. To understand why these strikes were described by eyewitnesses in the region as insane, you have to understand the specific lethal geography of the Persian Gulf. The United States Central Command did not launch a generalized bombardment. Instead, they executed a mathematically precise, localized destruction of 4 critical nodes: Greater Tunb Island, Bandar Abbas, Sirik, and Keshem Island. Look at how these targets fit together like pieces of a defensive puzzle. Greater Tunb Island is a tiny, heavily militarized landmass sitting directly in the middle of the Strait's shipping lanes, essentially serving as Iran's unsinkable radar picket and anti-ship missile fort. Keshem Island acts as a massive natural breakwater, masking the mainland. And Bandar Abbas is the absolute crown jewel of the IRGC Navy, the main naval base and nerve center, hosting their fast attack fleets and midget submarine pens on the morning of July 15 at exactly 4:15 a.m. local time. CENTCOM initiated what military planners call a high-density, compressed strike timeline. In a single, relentless 90-minute window, the entire landscape of Iranian coastal defense was rewritten. The objective was not to trade shots with active missile batteries, but to entomb them before they could even deploy. The primary targets were the IRGC's deeply buried missile cities, highly fortified underground cruise missile storage chambers blasted deep into the rugged limestone coastal cliffs. The technical execution of this 90-minute wave relied on a sophisticated orchestration of stealth, electronic supremacy, and raw kinetic energy. First, carrier-launched EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft operating from the USS Abraham Lincoln Battle Group blanketed the theater with high-powered directed energy jamming. In a matter of seconds, Iran's Russian-made S-400 and domestic Bavar 373 long-range radar networks were completely blinded, showing nothing but static. With the coastal airspace effectively opened, the heavy hammer fell. Operating from global distances, U.S. Air Force B-2 Spirit stealth bombers slipped through the darkness undetected. They were loaded with GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrators, 30,000-pound, GPS-guided bunker busters specifically designed to punch through 60 feet of reinforced concrete and solid rock before detonating. When these munitions struck the cliffside facilities at Sirik and Greater Tunb, the kinetic shock waves were so profound they registered as minor seismic events on regional earthquake monitors. The reinforced steel blast doors of the missile caves were blown outward from the internal pressure, detonating the anti-ship cruise missiles inside their own storage racks. The IRGC's primary coastal assets were destroyed before they could be rolled out onto their launch pads. However, the most chilling demonstration of American tactical resolve during this entire operation did not happen inside a mountain cave. It occurred in the open water just off the coast of Kharg Island, and it sends a clear message to any global actor tracking this conflict. During the height of the strikes on July 16, a commercial oil tanker, unladen and flying a flag of convenience, attempted to run the freshly imposed U.S. naval blockade. The vessel was steering directly toward the Iranian oil export terminal at Kharg Island, completely ignoring repeated, explicit radio warnings from an American Aegis destroyer to alter its course. Rather than deploying a traditional boarding party or firing a standard shot across the bow, CENTCOM opted for immediate asymmetric escalation. An American MH-60R Seahawk helicopter fired a single AGM-114 Hellfire missile directly into the ship's primary exhaust smokestack. The precision of the strike was terrifying. It completely disabled the vessel's propulsion and auxiliary power systems instantly, leaving the massive tanker dead in the water and smoking, without rupturing the main hull or causing a catastrophic ecological spill. It was a flawless, surgical application of force. This specific engagement was highly symbolic. It proved to the world that the United States is no longer operating under the traditional cautious rules of maritime enforcement. By disabling a massive commercial vessel with zero hesitation, Washington signaled a total, uncompromising policy for maritime defiance. The message to Tehran and to the international markets was unmistakable. The coastal hideouts are gone, the gates of the Gulf are locked, and the U.S. military has the absolute technical capacity to enforce the boundary with absolute precision. To truly understand the collapse of Iran's coastal defense strategy during these July 2026 strikes, we must examine a profound structural flaw in modern military theory: the illusion of the impenetrable sanctuary. For decades, Western defense analysts spoke with immense anxiety about the myth of the fortified Iranian coast. The conventional wisdom dictated that by tunneling deep into the sheer, jagged limestone of the Zagros Mountains and hollowing out the cores of Persian Gulf islands, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had created an unassailable defensive wall. These underground missile cities were supposed to be the ultimate asymmetric insurance policy. But this strategy suffered from a fatal conceptual flaw: static entrapment. The IRGC built its entire deterrence model on 20th century assumptions of concealment. They believed that because a bunker was buried under 90 feet of solid rock, it was safe. What they failed to realize is that in the era of pervasive, persistent intelligence collection, concealment is dead. Through the constant deployment of modern military satellite constellations, high-frequency synthetic aperture radar that can peer through weather and camouflage, and advanced signals intelligence tracking electronic signatures, fixed hideouts cease to be hidden. You cannot move a mountain. Once the precise geographic coordinates of these subterranean entrance tunnels, ventilation shafts, and exhaust ports are permanently mapped and logged into the targeting computers of American stealth bombers, their defensive value drops to zero. In a matter of seconds, these highly prized subterranean hideouts are transformed from impenetrable bastions into highly vulnerable concrete tombs for the very troops and advanced armaments trapped inside them. This brings us to the second layer of Iran's asymmetric blind spot: the illusion of arsenal sustainability. Mainstream media reports often focus exclusively on the dramatic explosions of active missile launchers, but this reveals a fundamental lack of understanding regarding modern strategic attrition. As former CENTCOM Deputy Commander Vice Admiral Robert Harwood pointedly observed during a recent security briefing, the true significance of the July campaign lies not in the destruction of individual mobile launch platforms, but in the systematic degradation of the underlying logistical infrastructure. The United States military did not just aim its precision munitions at the front-end launchers visible on the coast. Instead, CENTCOM intelligence mapped out and systematically destroyed the secondary assembly plants, the component storage warehouses, and the narrow transit corridors connecting the industrial interior to the coast. By severing these supply veins, the U.S. has stripped the IRGC of its ability to regenerate its lost arsenal. A missile force that cannot replenish its munitions is a force with an expiration date. The structural result of this strategic blind spot is both absolute and devastating. Over the course of just 4 days, the IRGC Navy has been systematically dismantled and stripped of its primary operational utility. They are no longer an offensive threat capable of dictating terms to global maritime commerce or enforcing a credible veto over the Strait of Hormuz. Instead, they have been reduced to a highly vulnerable, localized force pinned down along their own shattered coastlines, utterly incapable of protecting their primary naval bases from further precision destruction. The asymmetric shield has not merely been cracked, it has been completely shattered, exposing the geopolitical vulnerabilities of the state beneath it. To truly grasp the magnitude of the mid-July strikes, we must lift our gaze from the tactical geography of the Persian Gulf and look at the global geopolitical chessboard. Military kinetics are never isolated events. They are profound economic and diplomatic accelerants. When the first American bunker busters fractured the limestone cliffs of Greater Tunb and Sirak, they sent immediate shockwaves vibrating through global markets, South Asian capitals, and the energy security paradigms of the world's largest powers. Consider the immediate macroeconomic reality. The energy shock. The moment the United States officially declared the Islamabad MOU dead and clamped down its hard naval blockade on July 14, international energy markets panicked. In a single, frantic trading session, global oil benchmarks experienced extreme volatility. Driven by the acute fear of a prolonged disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, the price of Brent crude oil surged upward, aggressively breaking past the $88 per barrel mark on international exchanges. This sudden spike immediately threatened to upend global inflation models, forcing central banks worldwide to recalibrate their projections as the risk of cascading energy costs loomed over an already fragile global economy. This brings us directly to the strategic dilemma facing South Asia, specifically the Islamabad dilemma. Pakistan is not a passive bystander in this conflict. It is structurally exposed. Islamabad had invested massive diplomatic capital into mediating the June ceasefire, positioning itself as the primary geopolitical bridge between the Western coalition and Tehran. For Pakistan, the sudden collapse of the truce on its western frontier represents a compounding crisis. A protracted war right next door directly threatens its domestic economic stabilization efforts. The immediate regional fallout has already manifested in sharp energy adjustments, forcing local fuel prices upward, with high-speed diesel tracking above 354 rupees per liter at regional pumps, straining domestic budgets and compounding local inflationary pressures. Furthermore, this regional instability has forced a high-stakes alignment with Beijing. The joint statements radiating from Beijing and Islamabad over the past 48 hours, urgently calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities and a return to diplomatic frameworks, highlight a shared vulnerability. China is exceptionally dependent on a stable Persian Gulf energy matrix. A permanent disruption to the maritime flow of Middle Eastern crude through the strait fundamentally threatens the industrial heartbeat of the Chinese economy, making the resolution of this conflict a matter of core national security for Beijing. Yet, as the pressure mounts, the structural dynamics of asymmetric warfare are expanding the conflict zone. Planners in Washington and Islamabad are closely monitoring a dangerous phenomenon, the regional proxy warning. Recognizing that its domestic coastal shield has been critically degraded by CENTCOM's high-cadence air campaign, Tehran is actively attempting to offload the pressure. Verifiable signals intelligence indicates that Iran's command architecture has issued preparatory directives to the Houthi movement in Yemen. The message is clear. If the United States escalates further and begins targeting domestic Iranian energy infrastructure or inland refineries, the Houthis must prepare to deploy their drone and anti-ship missile arsenals to enforce a total, violent closure of the critical Bab el-Mandeb Strait. What began as a localized extraction of Iranian naval assets in the Persian Gulf is now threatening to metastasize into a dual chokehold crisis, forcing the global community to choose between absolute escalation or absolute containment. To maintain the strict intellectual integrity that defines predictive history, we must now engage in the vital exercise of steel-manning building the strongest possible counterargument against our own thesis. A lazy analyst looks at the devastation of Iran's coastal hideouts and concludes that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is finished. But a cold look at the map reveals that while Iran's maritime veto has been shattered, its broader regional deterrence remains dangerously active. We must give credit to Iran's remaining operational punch. Even as American bunker busters were leveling the bunkers of Bandar Abbas and Greater Tunb, Tehran executed a highly coordinated, high-volume ballistic missile and drone counter-strike that successfully bypassed regional integrated air defenses. Look at the coordinates of the retaliation. The IRGC successfully penetrated the air defense umbrellas of several heavily fortified installations. They struck the Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait, hit the Sheikh Isa Air Base in Bahrain, the very home of U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, and damaged logistics nodes along the Jordanian border. Furthermore, Tehran reminded the world of the immense cost of regional access by shifting its crosshairs toward critical infrastructure. During the July 16 counterstrike, Iranian drones successfully struck a major Kuwaiti desalination and power plant, temporarily knocking out utility grids and demonstrating that even a conventionally degraded Iran can impose severe, asymmetric economic costs on U.S. regional partners. This brings us to the ultimate reality of Iranian geography, its massive continental depth. While the U.S. Navy has successfully pulverized fixed coastal installations along the Persian Gulf, these littoral networks represent only the outermost skin of the Iranian defense apparatus. Behind the destroyed coastal hideouts lies a vast mountainous landmass, roughly the size of Western Europe. The rugged terrain of the Zagros and Elburz mountain ranges holds thousands of mobile transporter erector launcher, TEL, ballistic missile systems buried deep within the interior. Pacifying or neutralizing this inland arsenal would require a multi-year conventional campaign that no Western power has the political will to sustain. The conclusion of our steelman is clear, objective, and stark. Through Operation Epic Fury and the intense strikes of mid-July, the United States has achieved absolute maritime dominance in the Strait of Hormuz. However, maritime dominance is not the same as regional immunity. The U.S. has successfully unlocked the gates of the Persian Gulf, but it has not insulated its regional allies from the embers of a cornered continental power. As we stand at this critical geopolitical juncture, we must look directly into the immediate future. Predictive history demands that we establish clear, verifiable milestones so that you, the analyst, can separate empty political rhetoric from genuine structural shifts over the coming weeks. The endgame of the July 2026 maritime war will reveal itself through two explicit indicators. First, keep your eyes on the immediate 72-hour window. Following the severe degradation of Iran's coastal assets, Major General Mohsen Rezaei issued a highly publicized ultimatum warning of a full-scale, unhedged offensive operation across the entire theater if Allied operations do not immediately cease. This is a critical metric for our thesis. If this window closes and Tehran fails to execute a coordinated, sustained counteroffensive capable of physically halting U.S. freedom of navigation, it will provide definitive confirmation that Iran's conventional coastal deterrence is functionally spent. It will prove they have been backed into a corner where their only options are symbolic retaliation or strategic retreat. Second, closely observe the Bab el-Mandeb trigger. Watch the operational posture of the Houthi movement along the southwestern edge of the Arabian Peninsula. If we witness a sudden, desperate surge in anti-ship ballistic missile launches and drone swarms explicitly targeted at shutting down the Red Sea shipping corridor, it will mean Tehran has realized its domestic Persian Gulf shield is gone. The closure of the Bab el-Mandeb is their absolute final proxy card, a frantic attempt to leverage global geography and force the international community to demand a ceasefire from Washington. Now, I am giving you your homework. As a student of predictive history, you must tune out the sensationalist media noise. Do not let your attention be captured by the daily cinematic maps of explosions or the panicked statements of politicians. Instead, look at the cold, hard data. Every morning, track two specific metrics: the daily volume of commercial maritime traffic transiting through the Strait of Hormuz, and the spot price of Brent crude oil on the London ICE exchange. That is the true scoreboard of this conflict. If the shipping numbers stabilize and oil prices begin to recede despite the geopolitical tension, it means the U.S. naval blockade has successfully detached the global energy market from Iran's strategic leverage. We live in an era of profound transition. Let us conclude with the ultimate lesson of this masterclass. True power in international relations is never about who fires the loudest shot or who wins the daily cycle of breaking news. True power is about who dictates the rules of geography. By systematically erasing 40 years of asymmetric coastal infrastructure, the United States didn't just win a military engagement. They fundamentally rewrote the physical rules of the Persian Gulf energy matrix. The old equilibrium is gone, and the new era of total maritime denial has officially begun. Thank you for joining this masterclass. Stay objective, stay analytical, and remember, history is always predictive if you know where to look.